Welcome to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast all about stories of safety leadership, presented by Dale Carnegie and the Board of Certified Safety Professionals.
And what a great opportunity again we have, Shelley, to talk with somebody from a different aspect, a different background of safety that will certainly be informative, practical, and helpful to us today.
I'm super excited about today. I think having Jim with us today is going to bring a different perspective, like you mentioned, than maybe some of our more typical guests have brought. So I'm really excited to get into some of his unique background.
Yeah. So, Jim, we'd just like you to kind of get us going here and thinking about some of the, first of all, where'd you grow up at?
Sure thing, Merle. And thank you all for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon and chat a little bit with the group and everybody in the audience. So I'm from the state of Indiana, where we're sitting now. Grew up in northern Indiana in Elkhart, Indiana. Did my bachelor's degree program at Purdue University.
Yes.
And that was a long time ago, longer than I care to admit. But kind of immediately after my undergraduate degree was done, I went to work in Washington, D.C., worked in the Washington, D.C. area for a handful of years. After that was back in the Midwest a little bit in Ohio and then Pennsylvania for 25 years. And then most recently, the last 4 years back in the Washington, D.C. area while I was doing my stint of public service with OSHA.
Which leads us to, we're going to go back to some of those other work parts in the past, but working with OSHA.
We've got lots of questions today.
Well, there are some people that would look at OSHA as the Darth Vader or the evil empire.
No doubt.
Which I think in safety world is unfortunate. Could you help us understand?
Yep, I sure can. I would always start a conversation when I'd be doing a presentation with a group of stakeholders from the agency, be they workers, employers, somewhat other different groups, or some combination of groups. I would always make sure to say that, look, it's fair to start from the perspective that everyone in the room, at least at some point in time, some of us today have used OSHA as a 4-letter word. And so you got to start there. You got to recognize that as the law enforcement agency for occupational safety and health for a big chunk of the workforce in this country, there is a role that has to be played of enforcement of the OSHA Act from 1970 and then the regulations that have been put in place since 1970. And that's important because what that does is that makes sure that we have a minimal accepted standard on workplace health and safety in this country, because there are so many employers and workplaces that are striving to go well above and beyond the minimum requirements and doing some incredibly good, valuable work, that if we don't have that minimum there, it makes it much more difficult for those employers that are trying to do right by worker health and safety to justify all of the aspects of that. There's a moral aspect, there's a cost aspect, there's a human perspective of that aspect too. So there's a lot of different things that come into play for that. And so OSHA is an important part of that overall fabric of occupational safety and health. I like to always also say that there's quite a synergy between the occupational safety and health profession and OSHA. One side doesn't exist in the state that it is today without the other. We need the health and safety professionals and the OSHA, the regulatory agency, to both coexist so that they help each other advance and continue to improve and get better on workplace safety and health in this country. There's still a lot of work to be done.
That's so true. I wish more people would hear you, be able to hear you put it that way.
Well, and it really is true. We used to, fortunately, the places that I worked at, we tried to look at, although we didn't like the idea of somebody coming in doing inspections, at the same time, our viewpoint was these people are here to help us do better and to help us point out areas where we could improve. Mm-hmm. And when we looked at it that way, that worked much better.
Yeah. And I was blessed to come to work with companies who felt the same way. But to Jim's point, sadly, I think there are so many companies out there that don't have that same viewpoint still.
So what exactly did you do there?
Oh, well, so I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health. That's a really long title that almost has to wrap around the backside of the business card. But essentially, the day-to-day work for me was to both provide the support and assistance to the assistant secretary of executing the mission of the agency, as well as the secretary of labor and the administration, but to also help on the operational aspects of the organization, everything from budgeting and personnel matters and office space to making certain that work around setting rules and regulations and guidelines was happening appropriately, to working with state plan OSHAs across the country and all of the aspects of the cooperative programs that OSHA has in place, which are big and vast and often kind of misunderstood or not understood by many in the employer community out there across the country.
Is there something that you saw that when you were doing that work that really did benefit employers and employees, but sometimes people didn't even know that was going behind the scenes? What's an example you could give us of that?
The one that comes right to mind, Merrill, is the OSHA Safe and Sound program. And when I speak with groups of people, I always still today ask people if they're aware of the OSHA Safe and Sound program, and you get 10, 20% of the room raising their hands. Most people don't know what that is. And in my opinion, the real key to moving from where we are to where we need to be in the future on occupational safety and health is really by a focus of making sure that safety and health management systems are in place, recognized, understood, and grow, improve, and mature at every workplace in this country. At OSHA, while I was there, we tried to convey that through the message that safety needs to be a core value in every workplace. And again, I would always give my quick summary of safety as a core value of when health and safety is part of the decision-making process from the boardroom to the break room and every room in between, then we know we've achieved safety and health as a core value in that workplace. So stepping back up to the Safe and Sound initiative at OSHA, what that is really a support mechanism to help workplaces, employers, workers, other interested folks to really elevate their game on safety and health management systems. And it's an incredibly valuable program at OSHA that, again, half a room of people, you get about 10, 15, 20%.
Well, it's hard to know how many people even on this podcast will be familiar with. So this is good for you to give a pitch for it.
Yep. So folks just go to their favorite search engine and type in OSHA Safe and Sound, and it's safe plus sound. You will get right to that page at the OSHA website. And the thing I would always say is it was also one of the things that the government that was a real value to any workplace to use. And in my opinion, it has a money back guarantee because it's free. So you just sign up for it. They won't overload you with spam email or ads for things that come into your email, but rather once a month, maybe twice a month when it gets closer to the focus part of the year for the program, you'll get an email with some tools to use right away to help advance your safety and health management system at your workplace.
And you told us this story earlier about one of the first days, I think you were out of college, one of your first jobs, about your connection there and then going the full circle. Would you tell that? Because I believe this is a great lesson for people that we could learn from your story.
Oh, yeah, sure, Merle. And, this was back a few years ago. I had the opportunity in my very first job out of college to go to an OSHA stakeholder meeting. I honestly don't remember what the subject matter of that stakeholder meeting was, but I was at that meeting, and it was in the auditorium at the Department of Labor building, the Francis Perkins building in Washington, D.C. And I was sitting there, and the person who at the time was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor came down to introduce and open up the meeting and just explain to people what the subject matter was. And I turned to the person sitting next to me, who was my boss at the time, and I said to him, boy, David, that guy has a really cool job. He gets to impact health and safety policy across the entire country and really around the world. And 30 years and maybe a couple months after that, I had the honor and the privilege to walk in the front steps of that building to take that job and go to work there for 4 years.
Wow, that's really cool.
And what was it like that first day when you took over and you said, this is what years ago?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so there's actually it's a two-part answer to that because if y'all remember back to 2021, we were kind of in the height of pandemic and everything was remote. So I was actually sworn in remotely on a team or a Zoom call. I was sworn in on January 20th. So it was really about 4 or 5 weeks later, the first time I had the chance to come to Washington, D.C. and go to work for the first time. Now, if folks have ever been to the Department of Labor building that OSHA is housed in, you come in kind of on a side entrance normally, but that first day, I made sure to go in the front door, up the front steps, take a few selfies because for me, it was like the first day of school. And I just really wanted to appreciate the moment of time of, again, kind of the space of who was I to have this opportunity and this time to give back to workplace health and safety, the profession, workers, and try to improve worker health and safety, and the opportunity that I had to do that over those 4 years.
And I think that's just good for everybody who's listening. Because, Jim, many people look forward to say, oh, someday I'd like to do that. Someday I'd like to get to that spot. And then when they get there, they kind of forget how they look forward to it, and they don't always savor it. It sounds like, oh, it wasn't always easy. There's no doubt. That'd be foolish to think otherwise. But you were able to do something that you aspired to when you were younger. And that's just a great way to live life, to cherish it.
Yep, totally agree. And, it was an opportunity. The pinnacle of my career was those 4 years and 1 day that I had the opportunity to be there. And, I looked at it every day while I was there. I tried to appreciate it, even though there were many, many very hard days, lots of long hours, blood, sweat, and tears, and knowing the toll of things that go poorly on workplace health and safety. I would also, in addition to a couple of other things, but one of the other things I still do today is I start each day thinking about currently the number 14, because 14 on average, any given day in this country, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, are the number of folks that won't go home today from work because of a fatality at work. And so I think of that and I internalize it for two reasons. One is it's motivational for me. It's a way to really think about the things we need to do, both me individually, but us, the health and safety profession, to try to make improvements around that. And I already had mentioned, in my mind, it's health and safety management systems really is the way to get us to reduce that number significantly. And secondly, in addition to that motivation, just a chance to reflect on the importance of the work that we all do, and that everyone engaged in health and safety to some regard is engaged on that. And within OSHA, kind of the inside the ball game picture, everybody that worked at the agency, if they were answering phones in an area office or doing the accounting in the national office or out there as a compliance officer in the workplace, played a part in making sure that those conditions in work got better over time.
So where was your first stop after you graduated?
When I graduated from college, my first job was with the Sheet Metal Workers Union. And so I worked with the sheet metal workers just under 5 years, doing health and safety with the union. And it was really primarily focused on health and safety education and training and integrating health and safety into the existing curricula that they had in place for their apprentice training program across the United States, to some extent Canada too, but really focused in the US. And so that was a wonderful opportunity, one, to kind of have that chance to be in the Washington, D.C. area. It was right outside of Washington, D.C. In fact, I live about 8 blocks from where my first office was currently. But to have that inside the Washington, D.C. understanding of how policy works in health and safety and other parts of the government as well. And then also just get to know work and workplaces from a regard of how workers viewed health and safety. So that job was about 4.5 years. And then from there, I went on. I took a job with the United Rubber Workers Union in Akron, Ohio, and the United Rubber Workers.
Home of Goodyear.
Goodyear and Firestone and
Firestone too, that's right.
Yep. And then the Rubber Workers Union merged with the Steelworkers Union, and so I went to work with the Steelworkers Union. And between the Rubber Workers and Steelworkers, it was about 25 years. And I always joked about saying that I was the player to be named later in the trade with the merger. So I was like one of the few people that worked in health and safety at the Steelworkers that they didn't hire, they just kind of got to adopt. And I was the assistant director of health, safety, and environment there for a big chunk of that 25 years. And I left there in about end of 2018, early 2019, and did some health and safety consulting for a couple of years before I had the opportunity to go to work at OSHA.
So no doubt you contribute a lot, but there's probably a lot of lessons you were learning in those years of working with the union, the training, and things like that. What were some key lessons you were learning along the way?
Oh yeah, I think back about some of the things I've had the opportunity to do, and one thing for me, a big chunk of my job was to go out to workplaces when there was an issue, a problem, or a concern, unfortunately a bad incident or a fatality, and do an incident investigation or help with whatever the challenge or problem was. I always like to kind of refer to it, the fact that 99.9% of the time, issues and concerns were taken care of at the facility level between the local union and the employer. So when they called our office for help, it was because it was a really bad day for them, or a really bad situation that had occurred. And so, we had that kind of unfortunate reality of jumping into those bad, challenging situations, not necessarily bad, but challenging situations, and having to help folks work through to try to get to a better space. A couple of the things I've always taken from there is one, the most important tool that you bring with you whenever you go out to a workplace are the 2 ears that you have on your head. And listening to folks that know what they're doing, they know how to do it, and they can explain everything you need to know and help you understand. Our job when we walk into that situation as a health and safety professional is to just help sift through that information and get it to a little bit more condensed space, and try to bring back something that is a workable, viable solution based as best we can on both improvement and also the facts to get us there. So I really learned that about my ears. I also learned same line, just a little bit different way to look at it, is that all of the institutional knowledge and capacity that exists at the workplace is so valuable, that the folks that work there are just so incredibly valuable. And, we've all seen this, but it seems like every workplace, every time we go there, it's the workforce is almost all ready to retire. And we don't do a great job in this society of making sure that we have an on-ramp for people to come in before the people have taken the on-ramp, off-ramp that are leaving. And so we need to understand how to better convey that institutional knowledge and capacity, because when it comes to health and safety, for example, the continuous process industries, go to an oil refinery or a chemical plant, there are folks that have worked there for 20 or 30 years who can tell you by the vibrations, the smells, and the sounds of what is happening in the process. And when you've just come out of technical school and have come to work as a chemical plant operator or a refinery operator, you don't know what those things are. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to do a better job from a health and safety perspective and operations, but a health and safety perspective of making sure we're conveying. So really learning from the shop floor, understanding what we can gain from that conversation is vitally important. And then I think also just the fact that none of us in the health and safety profession necessarily have to be an expert on everything. All we need to know is how to help folks get to the answers they need. And once you've recognized that you're not coming in there to be the end-all be-all answer to every question that they have, it both makes your life better, but it makes the outcome of your work so much more impactful.
Why do you suppose that so many industries struggle with that transfer of knowledge and information? Have you just given any thought to that?
I have.
Because maybe we could help people to hear, to think about.
Yeah, I think it's really, we've done such an important job of increasing productivity in everything that we do. Be it the fact that now when you stop to get gas, you can pretty much do your entire shopping list from the grocery store, pick up dinner, and get an oil change while you're filling up your tank. We've done a lot to increase productivity in all aspects of our lives, but because we've cut that productivity margin just kind of down to the bone of anything that was left on there that wasn't productive, useful time, it has taken away that opportunity for that transition or another way that I've always thought about it is the people that come to work in whatever their job is, whatever workplace, are really craftspeople. And in order to learn your craft, the best way to do that has been done for thousands of years has been through apprenticing with someone that knows how to do it before you. And that we've really, again, cut that down so that now we certainly have the book information that we give folks, but we no longer have that on-the-job training that takes place to the extent that it once did. And there are certainly differences in that across some industries that do a good job. But boy, if we were to look back at a number of the fatality investigations that I've been involved with over the years, there were so many times that one of the contributing factors that we would identify were what we would always refer to at the steelworkers as green training green. And what that meant to us was the brand new folks that were at the job, we're now training the even newer folks that had come in. And so
that's what we're seeing a lot today.
We're seeing that in a lot of different workplaces.
Now, Jim, you used the term earlier that you already get called into the bad situations, the difficult, many times fatalities. I am concerned that many times our people in workplaces, management teams, do not always know the best way to work with when there are fatalities, serious injuries at all, families, people, the coworkers that are left behind, all those dynamics that go into it. Could you help us understand from your experiences and perspectives, what are some things you've seen that worked well, some advice, those kind of things?
Sure, be happy to. It is an incredibly tough situation, one I wish nobody ever had to work with, but the reality is there are, at this juncture, the 14 a day across this country. A number of those are in different parts of work, but they are still all at work. So it's actually, I think an important premise to start that conversation, Merle, with the recognition that any specific given workplace probably isn't prepared for that, because if they were prepared, if they were having a fatality frequently enough that they were prepared to know what to do exactly step by step in that process, we got some other problems that we should be dealing with at that workplace. So this is really, once in hopefully a very long while that things occur and result in a fatality in a workplace. And so it is often just catching folks off guard. It also puts everyone in such high state of emotional response due to the traumatic stress that comes along with that fatality. There are personal concerns. We've just lost a member of this workplace who we've spent more time with than many of us are spending with our family members. And so it's really, I would always say there's so many different groups that lose when there's a fatality. There's the individual's direct family, their spouses, their children, their parents. But then there's their coworkers, their work family. And the work family is important and one not to let get too far. And then, of course, there's their role in the community, whatever they were, soccer coach, Sunday school teacher, whatever they were, that they're no longer in place in the community to be. So I would start with, recognizing and understanding that the emotional response is important and it's going to happen. You can't stop that from happening. You have to know that that's going to start there. And then you also have some things that have to be done. If it is an OSHA covered workplace and it was a fatality that involves something that's under the jurisdiction of OSHA, you need to make sure that the employer needs to make sure they're doing the phone call to let OSHA know about the fatality. Is that going to respond a response of an OSHA investigation to start? More than likely in a fatality, yes. OSHA will be out there same day, next day, very soon thereafter. depending on where it is in the country. And so, you need to have the things in place to be prepared for that. Merle, you mentioned it earlier. If we could see that as part of the process, they're coming to do their job. They are there because this is what the law requires them to do. And employers pay a lot of money for consultants to come in and tell them things that they could get better on health and safety or operations or quality. So let's, let OSHA do that for us as part of our tax dollars. So OSHA is going to come in and be involved with that. There also often are legal implications that come into play. And, that's something that I think frustrates a lot of health and safety professionals. But it's just, again, part of the reality of what we have in our society currently.
Legal tell us just a little more what you're
well, so a couple of things. One is there's a potential liability engaged with the fatality there. If it's an employee of the host employer where that took place, they're more than likely pretty well protected through the worker compensation laws. But if it's a contractor, if there's something that can be shown to be gross negligence in some states and a few other variables, then there could be some third-party tort litigation that's might or very well may or in some cases should happen because of what just transpired. But so and then just within internally, typically in a corporation, there are some legal ramifications that the corporate lawyers will jump in to make sure that they are protecting the best interests of the employer. Part of that does unfortunately come into play with the OSHA inspection and things, but there are some legal things to consider as well. I started with kind of the human element of this, and I guess I kind of missed out on the most important part of that is again, those different groups that have lost that loved one. That family that has lost that loved one is just a huge hole in their life that was totally unexpected. And anything from as simple as, where were the car keys of my loved one when this happened, to, what happens to our insurance and our salary and all of those things that need to be dealt with and dealt with appropriately. There's certainly ways to do that. It's not always the same.
What are some, I'll call them general things or actions that you've seen companies do that appear to be helpful? Again, everything is different, everything. But what are some general things? Let's start with their personal family.
Yeah, I think, and again, in the United States, not every workplace has a labor union, but those that do, I think one of the things to have some conversations before, just on a normal course of procedures, is to make sure that the employer and the union know if something like this horribly tragic incident takes place, what will the response be from each party to help out at the other end of that with the specific family members.
So you're saying they ought to do something ahead of time?
Just having a little something ahead of time to make sure they know what the other one's going to be doing, so that they're not both delivering a hot meal on the second night and walking into each other on the front porch with two meals, but to just make sure we know who's doing what from work. Again, not to say it necessarily has to be done together, because it certainly could be reasons that it should be done differently with the two groups, but just to make sure there's a little bit of coordination on that. Also, just in conveying the things like benefits. In some workplaces, if there's a union in place, there's someone from the local union who is very well in tune to the benefits and understands that very well as the HR folks do. And, it could either be HR and the person from the union, or maybe it's two different conversations, but just making sure, again, we know how that conversation is going to take place to convey that information.
Do you believe that, for example, I would think with a union and also with a company, a representative should talk to the family? And what, again, I'm not knowing how the appropriate is. What are things that can be said? What are things that shouldn't be said?
And when?
Okay.
And when? When should things be said? Because some family members will want to have a conversation same day, next day, and in other cases, they do not want to hear from anyone from work for a bit of time. They've got much more important things that they are dealing with and should be dealing with. So I think the when comes in play, but also yes, a little bit of the coordination with knowing what the family member, what's on their list initially. You can go and sit down with somebody after a horribly tragic event like this and convey everything they need to know about health insurance, for an example. And at the end of that conversation, or 5 minutes after you have left, they're not going to remember it. And so what good did it do to go kind of push in that first day to have that conversation, or that second day? But make sure there's the right time and place for those conversations.
So are you suggesting even that like an organization ought to make a phone call to the family and say, we'd like to talk, but we'll leave it up to you when you'd like us to?
Well, and I think this is one of the things that's in a unionized workplace where the local union can play very nicely to make certain that they've done the outreach to their members' family on behalf of the local union, and say, myself and Jane from the plant manager from the facility would like to come and sit down and chat with you, but you tell us when. And it might be right away because they may have some immediate questions, but it might not be for a bit of time. And it might be more than once, or it may be, can you meet with my cousin that's helping me with these things? And I think there's one other important thing is, in life, we all have very unique circumstances to our life. No one has a cookie cutter Hallmark movie family setting. And so we all have some things that we carry with us. And it's important to recognize when one of these events occur, that family also has some situations that might be different and necessitate some difference and nuance in the response. Again, this is part of why there's really not a good checklist to start with, to just say, here are the things that need to be done. It's got to be very much tailored to the needs of the individuals.
There was a unique situation years ago that I was made aware of an employee that lost their life. And that person had two different families that didn't know each other. And again, delicate, but it has to be dealt with. So somebody needs to be wise enough to say, let's just know how to move here respectfully, but wisely.
Yes. And to have the presence of mind to just make sure we're hearing, listening, using those ears, listening to what's going on, and making sure the response is correct. And again, there are lots of anecdotal situations over the years that were very different. And but the one last thing I'd mention on this is I spent a lot of time sitting on a front porch or around a kitchen table talking to family members of a fatality victim as I was doing my job for the union. And the one thing that was present in every single one of those is they always had way more questions than I had answers, or probably will ever have answers. And so it's okay to not have every answer to all of the questions right away, but to be honest and open, and just make sure that you're being forthright with them and treating them in respect to what they're going through.
What about for the workforce? What have you seen that organizations did well to help the workforce that also had to deal with this?
Yeah, and there've been seen all sorts of whole spectrum of responses of how we deal with such things in the workplace. And again, not that there's one right answer to this, but I think that knowing that people are going to need some time and some space, people react differently in this very traumatic space and time. And so just having a little bit of respect for folks and giving them the leeway, some space, some time. For some folks, they may not be able to come back to work the next shift. You might need a couple days before they're able to come back and clock back in and walk back into that workplace. Other people may need to come to work the next day because that's what I do, and I need the normality of my routine to continue. But I think making, again, the space, some organizations have very good employee assistance programs in place. Some organizations have employee assistance programs in place that aren't quite as good. And so maybe a little pre-check of the employee assistance program to know if they have the capacity for something like this is an important item for, not necessarily for the health and safety managers, although it might be, or maybe this is something the safety and health committee would do, but more so to be working with the HR or labor relations, whomever the right points of contact for the EAP program might be, to see if they have the capacity at the other end of that phone number to provide this kind of response, because they don't always. And it's not just putting the EAP cards on the break room table and saying get back to work.
Have you ever seen situations where people would bring in grief counselors? Yes. And just have them available for people?
Yes, very much so. And there are a number of organizations across the country that train folks on post-incident response. And so bringing in some of those folks, depending upon availability and distance from where the facility is important, because you would like to see that happen pretty quickly. Not necessarily the same shift, but maybe by the next morning to have somebody in there to help with that response, and just holding some meetings voluntarily, having everybody in a opening session, and then volunteer if you'd like to come back and talk to the counselor or counselors. Depending on the size of the workforce, it may need to be more than one person, and just making, again, that space and time available for folks to sit down and work through this and process this, so that, and the ultimate goal of this is so that when we are going to get back to work, we're going to be able to get back to work without that trauma of what just transpired affecting how we are doing our work when we start back up the whatever the process is that we do at that workplace.
And it's interesting because I've experienced, you mentioned just laying the cards on the table with here's EAP's phone number. I've seen times where that happens and folks don't want to be the first person to walk up or have somebody see me go take one. But when you have the group meetings and group setting to where they can just speak to everyone involved and no one has to speak up, and then you have the smaller sessions or open it up where folks can come, I've seen that work so well, and then folks feel more comfortable to come and speak and get some help.
Yeah, and being able to do it kind of on their own pace of saying,
exactly.
All right, I need the morning here, but I'd love to chat this afternoon.
Yeah, and I think that's very important because, as you said, there's people, there are different levels. There are those folks, I just need to keep busy, so I keep my mind on things. And there are other folks that I have to regroup. And it's being respectful and that. What are some other things that you believe would be helpful for organizations to realize about OSHA overall?
So OSHA, again, has a role of being the law enforcement agency for the OSHA Act and the regulations and standards that are in place. Just a given. That's there, and they have that obligation. And if they weren't doing that, as we talked about earlier, we'd lose that ground floor on health and safety across this country. But also that I think it's important if we think about OSHA in terms of the group of people that work for the agency. And so, in this country, there were roughly 2,000 folks that worked at OSHA at the time I left, a couple under 2,000. And then when we add in the staff from the state plan OSHA programs across the country, roughly double that number. So there are 4,000 public servants who are working in the occupational safety and health regulatory space. And I don't mean to discount folks that work for the Mine Safety and Health Administration or other parts of health and safety regulatory agencies. But for that OSHA piece, about 4,000 folks across the country, give or take a couple handfuls. And those folks are incredibly talented, incredibly valuable, and so committed to the mission of the agency. And the mission of the agency is just to make workplaces safer. And, to provide a safe and healthy workplace to workers across this country. And it is an incredible mission that they have taken on. They have done so in, kind of all of the challenges that working for the government brings to it. They're probably doing it for less pay than they would be making in the private sector. They're probably doing it with not the accolades from their peers when they show up and knock on the door as a compliance officer. And
or when they go to parties and people say, "Oh, what do you do?"
Yeah.
I think.
Hi, I'm from OSHA. I'm here to help.
I'm from OSHA and here to help. Unless they go to the parties with the IRS agents, and then they can commiserate
together. Yeah.
But so they carry all that with them. But again, they are such talented, dedicated staff, so well qualified, well educated folks that are working to improve workplace health and safety across this country. We have challenges. We could certainly do better in occupational safety and health in this country. We've got a large number of workers that we have the obligation to protect through the OSHA Act. And, the budget that OSHA gets to do it, I hope it's fair to say that they use every nickel and every penny very well to achieve that mission. But when you think about it, one of the ways I like to think about it was in terms of the dollars per worker that OSHA has to do their job. And it's less than $5 per worker per year. And so that agency is trying federal dollars. Mm-hmm. It should preface that it's federal dollars. It's just a little bit over $5 if you add in what the states throw into the state programs. But still, we're in the same ballpark. The way I would always try to tell that story was folks probably had picked up a coffee at a coffee shop sometime recently, and you can't very easily buy a coffee for under $5 these days. But that's what we're trying to do to protect the health and safety of workers across this country. And one of the ways I like to convey that was maybe it's time we start talking about making worker health and safety have a second cup of coffee, and let's give a little bit more resources where they're needed so that we could actually do some of the things that the Act asks the agency to do, because right now they're really strapped for resources to accomplish that. And, lots of stuff going on inside the Beltway that I'm glad we haven't touched on today. So, there's lots more to unpack on that conversation as well. But then I try to draw back and think in a bigger, broader sense. And I think about the things that have been accomplished over the 50 plus years that OSHA's been in place. And I certainly have seen the improvements that have been made in the 30 plus years that I've been in health and safety. And I think it's fair to say for that entire 50 of by any indicator of the improvements that have been made, in part because of the work of the agency, in part because of the work of health and safety professionals, in part because of the workers that have been involved, and in part because of the employers that have been involved.
Well, those people who chose to dedicate their time, their minds, their skills, their abilities, their gifts that they had for the well-being of other people, there's something to be said for that
Absolutely.
Force of people. Perhaps one other area, just a little bit different that you mentioned in our pre-call, was for people's personal growth. And one thing I believe you've done for your personal growth is podcast. Tell us about that and maybe other things you've done just to grow personally, because that's an important part for every safety professional, not to just stay stagnant, but to grow.
Yeah, no, I think that's really fair. And I took a little break after I left OSHA, try to reset my head a little bit, and then, focused on what is next for me. And, I sure hope I've got a long time still to do worker and workplace health and safety. And so I have very much been focused on the work I'm doing with the group I work with now at Nexus HSE, is to try to help develop people professionally, both interpersonal skills as well as the technical skill sets that folks need, not just at the C-suite of organizations or the health and safety director level of organizations, but trying to also reach out into the organization, making sure we're developing the next generation of the professionals to step in. If we properly develop those next generation of health and safety professionals, it makes all of our lives so much easier. And so, I certainly have, one of the things I just love to do, gosh, that's embarrassing to admit, is I like to listen to health and safety podcasts. And, I've got a whole slew of them that are on my phone, on my feed. And, I am always behind because you can't keep up with them all. But even ones that I might not totally agree with the content, the delivery, or the message, I still like to listen to because I want to understand where people are coming from a different perspective. And that there's not just one set of answers to the quiz that we all have in front of us in occupational health and safety. It's much more of a long form essay to each question, not a multiple choice or a true and false. And so we need to make sure we understand and try to always keep in mind that we don't have all the answers, and we need to make sure that our mind is open to whatever the next thing around the corner that we're not aware of yet, or maybe we see it coming and we need to be ready for it, but making sure that our mind is open to recognize, understand, and be ready to move forward so that we can continue to improve on workplace and worker health and safety. And again, I've been hyper-focused on making certain that health and safety management systems are part of that conversation. And I think when we take a health and safety management system and we make sure that it includes a fatality and serious injury prevention element. And then I always say to couple it with human and organizational performance to really engage and involve with that institutional knowledge and capacity of the workforce, that I believe we will get to the point that those systems are going to address the risks that folks are facing in work, and those hazards will be addressed, and that fatality number is going to start to change in its trajectory from being a flat line that it's been for really a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jim, thank you for giving your time, because you have continued to extend your public service to people and to these listeners just by doing this, of just sharing your experiences, observations, and knowledge about the OSHA organization, but also how to deal with difficult situations that none of us want to, but will at times have to address. And so thank you for giving your wisdom experience.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And I think your commitment to this field of work is commendable. And the fact that you want to carry on and continue that, I know warms my heart as well. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Nope, thank you all. Appreciate the time.
Good. Many safety professionals get a little, whoa, it's OSHA. But what we were able to hear today was a man who gave many years of his life to helping in OSHA, and plus a background of that of safety. And one of the great lessons I just took from it was where he talked about those bad situations, those difficult situations, and just the need for an organization to respectfully and thoughtfully and wisely respect the family and to do what they can to emotionally care for the family, the work family of those that have been either hurt or lost their life. And I believe that's very wise, good advice for people to listen to.
You're right, Merle. And, it's something we wish we didn't have to talk about at all. But as they'll hear Jim talk about, there's still on average 14 people every day that lose their life at a workplace. So it's still a very real topic to learn about, one that we hope we never experience.
Yes.
But if we do, I think some of the words of wisdom that he shared with us today would be helpful. And, one of the things that he talked about with us was, regardless of whether you're leadership, the employee, a member of a collective bargaining unit, we all come from the same pool of humanity. And I think when we have these podcasts, one of the most common threads we hear, it all comes back to people. And at the end of the day, we all come from that same pool of humanity.
And people, as he said, that want to earn, to care for their families, want to go home safe, sound, and just take care of their loved ones. And that's the great part that OSHA wants to play, and that our professionals in their listeners podcast get to contribute to the well-being of others.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast produced in partnership by Dale Carnegie and BCSP, with your hosts Dale Carnegie Master Trainer Merle Heckman and Shelley Baber, EHS Director of Electrical Engineering Services and Systems Division at Eaton. Executive produced by Nathan Wilson. Produced by Joel Burgai. Directed by Giachi Liu. Edited by Jared Griot and Kyla Anderson. Editorial support from Brandon Mohaupt. Social media support from Braylon Morgan and Crystal Keithley. Consulting producers are Colin Brown and Mark Sullivan. To have new episodes delivered directly to you, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. If you'd like to share your story of a safety leadership challenge you faced, email us at info@mybigsafetychallenge.com. See you next time.